Pre-sermon video. Water rushing over rocks. Water rushing over rocks. Come and grab your seat in the sanctuary. John's gonna do a sermon. He's gonna be great, so great. Inspirational walking over water. Doop 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 doop. Ooh, dancing. Doop 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 doop. John's so great. Freedom.
So when you can't get the audio on the computer to work, you give Niall a microphone. So that was Niall's improvised audio this morning. Let's just give him a hand. Which is great because now we can cancel our Spotify subscription. You got it covered, man. Well, welcome here. My name is Jon. I'm one of the pastors here. If you are new to church, if you're new to Jesus or new to North Langley, we're very glad to have you here. If this is your church home, welcome home. Over the past few weeks and up until our Advent season, we've been going through a series called Freedom, where we are unpacking 12 steps of discipleship as we follow Jesus that can lead us into a deeper, truer, freer kind of life. It's similar to the 12 steps you'd see in AA or Freedom Session if you're familiar. And a couple weeks ago, we looked at step 1. And step 1 is simply that we admitted we were powerless over our deepest problems, powerless over our lives, that they had become unmanageable. And maybe you're here and nothing has ever felt truer, this idea of unmanageable and helpless, that life has hit a place where you just with open hands say to God, I have nothing and I can't do anything about it. And maybe you're here this morning and it's not rock bottom, but there's something that's quietly simmering in the background. Maybe there's a secret addiction, a habit you cover up, or a part of your personality that's starting to cost you more and more and more, and you hope that no one finds out. But whatever it is, whether it's already out in the open or whether we're still wrestling on the inside, there's a part of our lives that we admit that we are powerless over, that they've become unmanageable. And then last week, we come to believe that God could restore us to sanity. That if we are powerless, we come to the point and say, well, if I am powerless, is there someone out there who has the power to do what I cannot? And the answer is yes. And we take that step of faith to say that I believe that where I am powerless, that God is powerful, that in my unmanageable and in my inability, that God has the ability to bring change. And so this week is step 3, where we make a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we have come to know him in Jesus. If you're familiar with AA, the phrase that they would use is God as we understand him, or God as we've come to know him. And we're not going to just stop at your best idea of God, my best idea of God, because sometimes it's our very idea of God that can keep us from continuing in this journey. That if God is an angry parent ready to punish any act of wrongdoing, well, we're not going to bring the areas of brokenness to him. We're going to cover that up. We're going to hide, because if God finds out what we're really like, well, then we're in for it. And so if our idea of God is angry parent, we want to surrender that. If our idea of God is he's some kind of like chill, stoner, surfer, slacker, like he's the biggest Lebowski, and he's like, oh man, don't even worry about it. It's no problem. Well, we're not going to bring anything to God because he doesn't care. He's just so happy with the way that everything is. But if we feel powerless and broken and there's this God who doesn't care, why would we bring anything to him? Or maybe God's more of a vending machine that as long as we have enough credit, that we can get whatever we need from him. And so we're not just going to say God as we understand him. We're actually going to say God as we have come to know him in the person of Jesus. That God made flesh is good, is powerful, and is willing to meet us in our helplessness. And so if we are powerless, and if God is powerful, then we come today to make a decision to surrender our lives to him. But maybe it's that powerlessness idea that you're hung up on. Maybe you're like, actually, I'm not like, sure, I could be doing better, but I'm not like all the way powerless. And surrender is a really big word. Like you can't be a little bit surrendered, just like you can't be a little bit married. If someone's like, are you married? You're like, a little bit. You're like, oh, you really are or you really aren't. You're not a little bit married. Or like, are you pregnant? You're like, kind of. You're like, no, you are pregnant. You are all the way married, all the way pregnant. If you are surrendered, you are all the way surrendered. There is a giving up of control. There is a giving over that not just the parts that I want to give God, but everything. And when we think of that, we're like, okay, but I'm not actually all that bad. I'm actually doing pretty well, thank you. So maybe I could give God part of my life. Is there like a token or an idea that I could give over? And so maybe it's not our idea of God, but maybe it's our powerlessness or lack of that's holding us back. Maybe we don't have to surrender. Maybe we can just tinker. So we're going to look this morning at Luke chapter 18. If you want to use your pew Bible, it's page 494. And in this, Jesus tells a story. Jesus will often illustrate an idea or a concept with a once upon a time. So Jesus is talking to some people, and this morning we're going to look at one of these stories where he begins and he says, once upon a time, as it were. And he tells a story about a Pharisee and a tax collector. And a Pharisee is the kind of person these days who would write the books we read. They would make the podcasts we listen to. They would stand on a stage like this and they would say words like this. The Pharisees were these kinds of people, religious leaders. And tax collectors, if you were here last week, Pastor Matthew Price unpacked the reality that tax collectors were contracted by the Roman government to collect taxes from the Jewish people. So they were outcasts. They were seen as traitors. They're the person that if you were sitting beside them and you knew what they did, that you wouldn't talk to them, you wouldn't go for lunch with them, that they'd be separate, even if they were here. A couple years ago, I met someone. I'm like, hey, what do you do for work? And he's like, please don't tell anyone, but I work for the CRA. I'm like, oh, so we still feel that way. And so there's a story Jesus tells in Luke chapter 18, verse 9 to 14, about a Pharisee and a tax collector. So these are the words of Jesus. To some who were confident of their own righteousness and looked down on everyone else, Jesus told this parable. Once upon a time, 2 men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee stood by himself and prayed, God, I thank you that I'm not like other people, robbers, evildoers, adulterers, the people who are powerless and helpless in their lives. God, I'm not even like this guy over here, this tax collector. I fast twice a week and I give 1/10 of all I get. But the tax collector stood at a distance. He would not even look up to heaven, but he beat his breast and said, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. I tell you that this man, rather than the other, went home justified before God. For all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. So when we read a verse from the Bible like this on a Sunday morning, I'll say, this is the word of the Lord, and you say, thanks be to God. This is the word of the Lord. Would you join me in prayer? Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, we ask this morning that you would help us to see ourselves as we truly are, that you would help us to see you as you truly are, and our lives as they truly are. So God, would you meet us in this moment, that you would open our ears to hear what you're saying, that you would soften our hearts to respond, that we'd be transformed to be a people that look more like you than we do right now. And we pray this in your name. Amen. So Jesus starts this story off. It's to some who were confident of their own righteousness and looked down on everyone else. Now, confidence it's this idea that you're comfortable relying on it. If I'm a confident mechanic, I'll fix not just your brakes, but my own brakes. If I'm a confident baker, I'm going to bring cupcakes for everyone to share, and I'm going to let you know that I did it. And if I'm confident in my own righteousness, I'm going to stand in God's presence with a smile on my face, and when you ask me how I'm doing, I'm going to say, really well, thank you. I'm confident. And so the Pharisee, he stands there, he stands in God's presence, and he says, God, look at all I've given up. I don't even eat every meal. Look at all I give, 1/10 of everything, I give it to you. And do you know the kind of people that are worse than me? I'm actually doing really, really well. This Pharisee was confident in his own righteousness. Everything read and said on a Sunday morning, or for him a Saturday morning, everything read and said would have been a mental tick box for him saying, oh, crushed that. The Pharisee is my hero. See, I love feeling like that. I love coming here on a Sunday morning feeling like I've had a good week. I love being able to point at all the things that I have done, all the bad things that I haven't done. And more than that, when I turn on the news, when I scroll social media, when I hear stories, I keep writing a list of people that I'm better than. My politics are better. My theology is better. My daily life is better. And yours doesn't even have to be all that bad. I just feel really good when I feel really good. So when I can come and when I can stand before God and say, and God's like, hey, John, how are you doing? And I'm like, really well, thanks. I'm surprised you hadn't noticed. See, the Pharisee is my hero. This is how I want to stand before God. See, surrender means giving up control. Surrender means acknowledging that maybe it's not all good enough. Surrender means loss. Surrender means taking over. If one army surrenders to another, they don't get to decide what happens anymore. If someone surrenders to the police, it might mean prison or jail, but now it's no longer up to them to decide that. See, when I come to the idea of surrender, I want to come so confident in myself that I can say, God, look at everything I've done. Look at all the things I haven't. I'm good, and I want God to say, okay, yes, I agree, but that's not how this story ends. That's not actually how it goes. See, I think part of my struggle with surrender is I feel like I have to give up all the things that are good enough. And all I can see is the loss. All I can see is, God, I've done actually a pretty good job, and if I give up my pretty good, well, then that's admitting that it wasn't all that good to begin with, and so I'm going to just settle with hanging on to my pretty good. And there's a part of surrender that is giving up, and it's an important part, an essential part, an unchangeable part. But I think if all we think about is what we'll lose when we surrender, we're missing part of this. And so I think a helpful picture is that of a 20th anniversary. So last year, Emily and I, we had our 20th anniversary, and we were talking to our friends Mike and Jana, and they had gone to a town on the island called Ucluelet, and they had gone to this restaurant, and talking to Mike, like, if you've talked to Mike Meary about this, like, his face just changes, and he's like, John, it's the most incredible thing I've ever eaten in my entire life. He's like, I can't even describe it. He's like, 2 things you need to know. Number 1, it costs what it costs. And number 2, it's the most incredible thing I've ever eaten in my entire life. I'm like, okay. So Emily and I talked about it. We're like, 20th anniversary, let's do this. So we booked a place in Ucluelet. We went there for a few days. And on the last night before we left, we had a reservation at this restaurant. So I made a reservation at this restaurant. It's called Pluvio. And I got the longest email I've ever gotten after a restaurant reservation. Normally, you make a reservation Friday at 6, and they're like, Friday at 6, and you're like, yeah, and that's it. But I got this long email from them, and it said, we're so excited to have you. We're really glad that you can come. This is how long it's going to be. This is what it looks like. This is what the sitting's like. This is what the music's like. This is what it is. But there's one line there that it says, we are not able to offer modifications or substitutions to dishes based on preference. That means that when you make this reservation, in the nicest possible terms, they say, we're excited to have you. We're so looking forward to it. We don't care who you are or what you think. You step in that door, and what they have already communicated is, I don't care who you are, you're not the chef. And even if you are a chef, you're not the chef here. And even if you're the chef here, you're not the chef now. You step in that door, you give up control. There's a surrender that happens to go to this place, and so I immediately canceled our reservation. And I was like, over my dead body. I am fine in the kitchen. And so for our 20th anniversary, I proceeded to just cook an okay meal. And I'm kidding. I didn't do that. Because if I had cooked an okay meal, that's fine. And we would have been okay, and we would have made it through. But we would have missed out on what could have been so much more. And so we actually did keep our reservation. We actually did go to the restaurant. And we sat down, and they brought the food, and they brought stuff. We didn't really, you got to choose this or this, but you couldn't change it. And I ate it, and I'm like, this is the best thing that I have ever eaten in my entire life. And that lasted for about 10 minutes. Because then they brought the next thing. I'm like, no. this is the best thing I've eaten in my entire life. And probably 6 times that night, the next thing was the best thing I have ever eaten in my entire life. And one thing, this sounds so bizarre, that stands out to me is the beets. They did something to a beet, and it wasn't a sauce. There was just a beet, and it was like they had done something to this beet that it was the most beetiest beet I've ever had. And you eat it, and you're like, I have finally met my first beet. And everything else was but a pale imitation. And I have access to those same beets, and I can't do that. See, that chef, he took the same beet, and what he did is he made something that was so incredible. And he just made it so much more of what it already was. And then at the end, the bill came, and Mike was right. It cost what it cost. But it was the best thing I had eaten in my entire life. And see, when we think about surrender, sometimes we get caught up on what we lose. Sometimes we get caught up in the fact that I'm good enough, that things are actually going pretty well, that things are okay. But then what we end up doing is cooking for our 20th anniversary. And see, even if it's not that bad, even if it's okay, even if we're making it through, we miss out on what it could have been. We miss out on not seeing a beet become more than a beet has ever been in the history of beets, but me. See, I settle for me being just me rather than the part of me and me as a person becoming the most Jon I could ever be. Because the chef knows what they're doing. And if we're willing to trust the chef with the meal, I think we can say, I'm going to trust God with my life. That surrender isn't just the loss, but surrender is what we're going to gain. And so we've read this verse before, but I want to read it again. From 2 Corinthians, it says, Now the Lord is the Spirit, and where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. And we all who with unveiled faces contemplate the Lord's glory are being transformed into his image with ever-increasing glory, which comes from the Lord, who is the Spirit. Do you want to be free? Do you want to be transformed with ever-increasing glory, more and more and more into the image of Jesus? I do. I very much do, because I've seen already how Jesus has started this in me, and I see that I like myself more now as a result of what he did than I have ever liked myself. I see what Jesus has done, and I have more freedom and more life and more joy. And I want to keep going on this road. And the way we keep going, this path to becoming the most of us that we have ever been, it's a lowering. This path is a downhill slope. Jesus says here, for all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. See, it's not taking all the good things of my life and leading with that. And it's not digging through to try and manufacture something bad. But humility, this humbling, it's connected to the idea of humiliation. It's not a mockery, but it's a revealing of what's already there. And see, when I struggled with this sermon series, I have honestly wrestled because I didn't feel bad enough to surrender. And what I was doing is I was fluffing up all the good and I was covering up all the bad. It's like when you visit someone's house and there's nothing on any of the counters. And you're like, where is all the stuff? And as one comedian said, he's like, we own stuff, but we've hidden it. And you're like, oh, okay. And so on Sunday morning, I show up and I've got a smile on my face and people are like, where is all your stuff? And you're like, I have it, but I've hidden it. And so when God says, Jon, how are you doing? I'm like, I'm great. But humbling is the willingness to open the cupboards of our lives and say, these are the things that I'm hiding. Put differently, in the words of Jesus, blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who don't have enough and they come to God and they acknowledge it. So maybe you're here today and you're wondering why you're here today. Maybe rock bottom is your reality, or you're just a little ways away from it. Maybe you are helplessly and hopelessly addicted, and if it hasn't cost you your joy, your job, your finances, or your family, maybe it's about to. Maybe you are here and you have nothing to offer and you have no hope and you wonder if you belong. And I want to tell you that you are in exactly the right place. That it is in that moment when we acknowledge to God that I have nothing, that God's like, perfect. Then you have space for everything that I want to offer. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Those who humble themselves will be exalted. Those who are honest to open up their lives and say, God, this is what I have. And maybe you're not at rock bottom today, but if you're honest, maybe there is something going on. Maybe there is some stuff, perhaps it's hidden. Maybe you're angry all the time and you can see relationships starting to singe from the heat of your words. Maybe your self-worth is tied up in your kids. If they do well at school or sports, you feel like a good parent or a good person, so you drive your kids hard. Maybe your security is based on the dollars in your account, and so a little more feels like enough, and you'll do whatever it takes just to get that little more. Maybe your hope for the future is dependent on the politicians in power, and so you're only ever as happy as the morning news. Maybe you only feel peace and contentment when you get your way. Maybe it's just that you can always find other people worse off than you. God, thank you that I am not like them. Like, how many TV shows do we watch just to make us feel better about ourselves? All these shows about people whose lives are so much more broken. Blessed are the poor in spirit. See, God pardons the guilty, but it's only the guilty who are pardoned. God justifies the sinner, but only sinners get justified. God forgives sin, but only those with sin can be forgiven. What can you be forgiven of is if you have no sin. See, the Pharisee is my hero. Not actually, but at a deep level, kind of. Because I like to exalt myself. I like to feel like I'm doing pretty well. But over the last couple of weeks, I've looked harder, not to try and create some kind of bad thing in my life, but just to see what's actually there, and I don't like everything that I've seen. See, I struggle with envy and comparison, where if someone has something good, I feel like I have less. And if what I have is better than someone else's, then I feel happier about it. This is not, don't write that down as to do for, I'm not saying this is good, I'm saying that this is my struggle. That what I have feels worse if you have something too. That I have so much fear that has impacted so many of my decisions that I'm so terrified that I'm going to do it wrong and that I'm going to get it wrong that I hold back and I hedge on the good that I know I should do. Because of this, to cover it up, I try to manage my reputation. That if I share something bad, I'm going to make sure it's not too bad. If I share something good, I'm going to try and make it just that little bit better. With the lust, with the anxiety, with the bitterness, with the self-worth that comes from achievement. Anytime I feel these feelings, I've noticed how quickly I turn to my phone. My phone this week was like, hey, do you want to know how many hours a week you use your phone? I'm like, not really. It told me anyways, and I have a part-time job. And my part-time job is my phone. And it'll tell me how many times I unlock it every day and how many hours I've spent. And every time I unlock it, not every time, sometimes it's maps, sometimes it's something else, but so many of those times it's me wrestling with the anxious feelings, with the uncertain feelings, with the unworthy feelings, with the things I don't know how to deal with, that I turn to my phone just to stop feeling them. See, surrender seems scary. And if I feel good enough, then it doesn't seem worth it. But if surrender means freedom from envy and fear and lust and escape and bitterness, I want to be free. Would you like to be free? Would you like to become the most of you that you could ever be? That if a chef and I both did the same thing with a beet, you could tell the difference. And maybe if you and God did the same thing with your life, maybe you could tell a difference. And maybe what you have done with your life, maybe that's run its course. And maybe it's time to let God, to let him see what he can do. See, freedom is a descent. It's a humbling. And it's not halfway.